Welcome to Queer Identities Abroad, Navigating Queer Life in Japan. I'm your host Max, and today we'll be exploring how foreign queer individuals navigate cultural differences and identity in Japan. We'll hear from several American expats about their experiences living as queer people in Japanese society. Queer identities and methods of expression differ from country to country, but also within countries based off of people's own circumstances, the places they live, their own family and friends. In my life, living in England, the people I surround myself with were almost always supportive and allowed me to live more or less authentically. At university as well, I've been able to choose my friends and the people I surround myself with. And working in a queer bar, it's been extremely rewarding and a privilege to be able to see so many people, so many queer people, living and enjoying their time. But in my studies, I've looked at the queer communities in other countries where queer people aren't treated as well as they are here. In studying about decolonial processes of queer liberation in Bangladesh and in Ghana, and also being a Japanese studies student where I've looked at the queer scene in Japan, both historically and currently. As part of my degree, I was able to have a year abroad in Tokyo, where I studied the language as well as the current social and political climate for queer people in Japan. While there isn't full same-sex marriage, there are partnership systems that grant some of the same rights as marriage between a man and a woman would grant. As well as this, in research provided by one of my lecturers, there's an overwhelming majority of Japanese people who don't mind if someone they know at work or they aren't too close with is queer, but if it's someone in their own family, their own private circle, it becomes an issue. However, during my time in Japan, I didn't have any interactions with people where I was worried for my safety, or Japanese people gave the impression that they felt negatively about my sexuality. Something I often tell my friends is that while Japan may not be accepting, it is definitely tolerant. But in my experience, I did feel accepted. However, I know that not all people will feel the same. Perhaps I was lucky to find a young group of friends more open-minded than others, and being in Tokyo, where all walks of life converge, it's likely that those I met were more open than those who may live in less populated towns and cities. It wasn't until after coming back from Japan and going back to my job working at the queer bar that I realized that I felt very differently about myself and my identity during my time in Japan. This feeling was backed up by my studies over the last 2 years, looking further into the state of queer rights and public opinion in Japan. While that's not to say that I lost a part of myself or had hidden an aspect of my identity, I think that the way I presented my queerness may have changed to align closer to standards in Japan. Yet to most people in the UK and US, they'd be able to recognize from the way that I present and speak that I'm a gay man. But that wasn't the case in Japan. One of the reasons for this podcast was to look at this further, whether people's presentations and performances of their queerness have adapted to fit in with Japan. Are people as open as they are at home, or will it shift to be more nuanced and filtered? When living abroad, people don't often expect their identity to change, but from my own experience, it did, albeit not to a great extent as I was only in Japan for a year. From my interviews, I found that this was a shared experience among other queer expats, but the extent to which people's identities have changed differed based on how long they've been in Japan and the people they surround themselves with. For most of my interviewees, the conversations we had were equally rewarding for them, as they were analysing their own lives in a way they hadn't necessarily done so before. And I hope that to my listeners, you'll be able to better understand the shifts and alterations that occur for queer people when living abroad in Japan, so that any prospective expats know what to expect. To start us off, let's hear from Sadie, an American who moved to Japan and experienced some shifts in her identity.
I kind of reverse came out. I was already out as a lesbian, and then I came out as bisexual when I came here. It was kind of like I had to come out to my queer family instead of coming out to like my straight family. As like, sorry, I also like guys, actually. I think that if I had stayed in America, I think I would have taken longer to kind of get to that side of myself. But when I got here, I actually pushed more towards my heterosexual desires because there was no women to date.
Sadie's experience highlights how moving to a new cultural context can accelerate self-discovery and shifts in identity. The heteronormative nature of Japanese society actually pushed her to explore her bisexuality more quickly than she might have back home. Japan's heteronormative society is often a big issue for many Western queer rights groups. The general lack of visibility of other queer people goes against the out and proud idea which is often celebrated in the West as the rubric for happiness. But the literature about Japan doesn't support this. Academics like Tamagawa and McClelland, who write extensively on the topic of queer Japan, both seek to reflect the nuanced nature of queerness within Japan. There are many queer people who are content with not coming out, staying under the radar, and even marrying someone of the opposite sex. From a Western perspective, this can feel like something from the past, but for many Japanese, they don't feel the need to share their private life with others. In a queer version of the Japanese concepts tatemae and honne, one's public facade and one's true feelings. It's this seeming invisibility of queer and lesbian women in Japan compared to Sadie's lesbian-rich home in the States that accelerated her exploration into bisexuality. Japan's heteronormative society aligns with one of the largest myths I hear about Japan. It comes up in old academic articles, but also from people who have some interest in Japan and Japanese culture. That being that Japan is a homogenous society, that people act the same way, believe the same things, and if you stick out, you get put back in line. But that isn't really true. In Tokyo particularly, it's quite the opposite, with so many different cultures and communities living together. While there are many social standards most Japanese adhere to maintain the status quo, everyone still has their own style of doing so. While Sadie wasn't changing herself with the intention to fit in with such a society, it's an interesting change that, as she explains, would have taken longer to come about had she remained in the States, but also may have allowed for her to have a smoother transition to life in Japan. Before going to Japan, this homogeneity was something I personally worried about. Would I stick out too much? Would I not be able to dress how I wanted to? But, like my interviewees, I soon realised that it wasn't as much an issue as I'd been made to believe. While I would often receive the occasional stare on public transport, it wasn't too pervasive that it felt like a burden. For my next participant, Gray, it was this same staring that helped usher in their own transformative journey.
The reason I decided to just go ahead and start medically transitioning in Japan is because I was already being stared at all the time as a foreign person. And so I decided, I don't really care. You know, people are already looking at me. I might as well lean into how I actually want to look, how I actually want to present, what I actually want to be, because it doesn't matter. They're going to be staring anyway. Yeah, I had long, I think when we met, maybe I had long teal hair and I have facial piercings and I'm covered in tattoos and hairy. And so very much not typical, not even how before I was started medically transitioning, I still wasn't presenting in a super typical way for Japanese society. And so I just decided I didn't care and I was going to lean into that. And so but coming back after being in a society where I was othered pretty much all the time and it didn't really, it didn't bother me. I was othered, but it was the safe othering, right? Like nobody was going to come and confront me about my presentation or who I was. Nobody's going to try to start a fight or be violent or bring a weapon or anything like that. Whereas that is different in the States. And that is something I worry about now that I am much, much more physically trans and perceivably trans. Is somebody going to come up to me with a gun? Because Kentucky has you don't have to have a license to conceal and carry, so those are things that I think about now because my visibility looks different and how I'm socially perceived is much different in the States versus when I was in Japan.
For most people, being stared at for your appearance would normally be quite unsettling. And Gray did mention this as well. But we can see that in Japan, they soon learned to ignore any of the negative feelings and instead embraced it fully. The constant visibility actually became freeing in a way. In speaking to Gray, I found that while they had always considered transitioning, it was this that gave them the push to begin a medical transition, alongside the cheaper healthcare and general safety in Japan compared to at home in the United States. While this was 2 years ago, it's likely that given the current situation regarding transgender and gender non-conforming people in the States, that if Gray hadn't taken up the fellowship in Japan, their gender journey and transition may have been much more difficult financially and socially. Interestingly, in other research on expats in different countries, when faced with difficulties or emotional discomfort, most people will make temporary changes to themselves in order to fit in with their host culture. But for Gray, as we can see, it was the opposite. Already an outsider to both their fellow students and the greater Japanese population, the unavoidability of their physical presentation and pre-existing desire to change how they look to better match their gender identity gave them the confidence to begin their medical transition. A key theme that emerged in our interviews was how living in Japan allowed many queer expats to explore their identities more freely, away from the expectations of home. I was able to relate most with what Don had to say on the topic. He's been living in Japan for 15 years, but still maintains some of the relationships and friendships from back home, but has spent most of his adult life living and working in Japan. For him, being in Japan allows him to live an unrestricted life, without having to worry himself with the expectations of his family, and, like Sadie, the developments he felt to his character was sped up due to being in Japan.
I think that becoming an adult after university in Japan has allowed me to I have to kind of put my own filters on. Does that make sense? If I was still in Michigan, I'd probably still be living by myself. However, I'd be checking in with my family from time to time, and it wouldn't feel like I was hiding it, but I'd definitely be feeling like I was living like a filtered life versus an unfiltered life on an everyday, every week. Living in Japan, if I only have to go and see my family once a year, I control exactly what I do. I have friends who may put me in check, from time to time, but they're not my family who I've grown up with. And they do allow me to be myself. So I'll definitely say that this, in terms of developing myself and becoming comfortable with what I like, how I want to talk about things, whether I want to talk about stuff in public or not, that kind of thing. With my development as an adult, I feel like I was very free, and it allowed me to find those things about myself faster than they would have if I had still lived in my hometown or in my home state.
The distance from family and familiar social circles allowed Don the autonomy to live more authentically without feeling the need to filter himself. Don's experience illustrates how geographical and cultural distance can catalyze personal growth, self-discovery, and the development of an authentic identity free from the constraints of family expectations. Of course, navigating queer identity in Japan isn't without its challenges. Many of our interviewees spoke about the complexities of coming out and being visible as queer in Japanese workplaces and social settings. Here's James talking about his experience.
Well, I think there's like 4 or 5 girls who work there, and I've come out to at least 3 or 4 of them. It just comes up a conversation, and we're talking about it, and then it's like, oh my god, and I'll feel comfortable saying, like, they'll be talking about, like, what about your past relationships? And then I'll say, like, oh, my ex-boyfriend. And then they'll be like, wait, did you say boyfriend? They'll be like, did you mean girlfriend? And I was like, no, I meant, like, boyfriend. And I was like, you know, I meant that. And then, like, I didn't know. And then, but then we can just keep talking normal. And then I've come up to one guy, and it was like the same thing where we were just talking about past relationships. And I was like, okay, let me just actually use like the male pronoun instead of being just super vague about it. And so, like all of them have been very like chill with it. But it's definitely like I feel like they don't bring it up, but they don't necessarily like avoid talking about romance. So, but yeah, to the other guys, I'm like, oh my god, like the people I haven't come out to yet, I'm like, yeah, I don't know if I'll probably just graduate and start working here. And I've never come out to them, which is sad, because like some of them are really like I feel like we're close friends and we go drinking, but I always feel like I have to like hide a part of me. I don't like hiding a part of me, but it's been like over a year now. It's been like a year and a half. And I'm like, at this point, if I come out to them, I don't know what their reaction's going to be, because they're all pretty like stereotypically like straight guys. So anyway, I'm sure I'm like overreacting, but anyway.
James highlights how Japanese people often don't expect people to be queer. Sexuality isn't at the forefront of their minds, and so they may just assume people are straight as that's the norm. He then goes on to talk about the careful navigation required in disclosing one's identity, gauging reactions, and managing potential misunderstandings or assumptions. He provides an invaluable insight into the experience not only of queer foreigners in Japan, but also the mindset of many Japanese queer individuals regarding coming out. demonstrating the considerations of queer people when deciding whom to disclose his identity to, as well as the reactions that can be expected. In discussions with Gray and Don, they recounted similarly how most Japanese people won't expect them to be queer, no matter how they present or speak, which can make it difficult to decide how and when to come out, illustrating the pervasive nature of these decisions across different aspects of queer individuals' lives in Japan, whether it's a nosy landlord, work colleagues, or friends of friends. Don recalled an experience with his dance captain.
There was this dance captain, and she'd asked a typical Japanese question before. That's like once. And she knew not to ask it again because she knew, that was like rude. And not just that, but it was just also repetitive. And it's like, she'll ask, like, are you dating? And I said, oh, no, I'm focusing on my blah, 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 which is a very coded answer for, please stop asking anything else right now. But it's like, there's a straight guy who asks the same thing and he'll be like, oh, what do you mean? You're so cool. And if you're maybe like, they'll start nudging that other ladies will love you because of, that being like the different factor. And that's one of the reasons why, timing and knowing the rules and listening to things, like I would like it for them to not be so invasive, but also it's my information. And we've already established a rapport that, you need to know how to ask what you want. And I don't want to have to tell people about etiquette or those kinds of questions in general, especially if, they come and I don't want to be the hero for those types of things because they want to ask me. So I'll say, yeah, in terms of people who know and they know how to be kind and they may just want to wait to ask you those kind of questions without anyone else around, yeah, that's fine. And if they don't know and they're asking, some people will just ask in general and they'll probably already not know, but I don't give them the right bait for them to continue to ask those kind of questions. And so they just stop. It goes back to the conversation about educating people. That's when queerness has to come and say, okay, I'm sorry, you don't know what you're talking about because you don't live this life. And you probably do not have someone around you who is a queer person who is teaching you these things. And so now you're going to go off the cuff, which is a conversation I don't like having because I don't ever want to try and educate someone and just put them in their place.
Don's words highlight the challenges of managing disclosure, educating others, and maintaining boundaries, emphasizing the need for discretion and the challenges of dealing with potentially invasive questions. He describes using coded language to deflect personal inquiries and notes the difficulty of educating others about appropriate etiquette without becoming a hero for such matters. This extract underscores the delicate balance queer individuals must strike between openness and privacy, especially in professional environments. This highlights the ongoing negotiation between personal comfort and the perceived need to educate others, even when it may be uncomfortable or unwanted. This reinforces the earlier themes of identity management and the complexities of navigating queer identity across different social and cultural contexts. A significant part of queer life for many expats in Japan centers around Tokyo's gay district, Shinjuku Nichome, the beating heart of the Japanese queer scene. Don, who has been unofficially dubbed as the mayor of Nichome by those who frequent the area, shared his perspective on the area's importance.
But you can find friendly people, and that is, I would say definitely the atmosphere and the alcohol is helping people to open up, especially when it's a mixed bag of people, tourists and non-tourists, Tokyo livers and dwellers and non-Tokyo dwellers, long-term residents versus people who are living there or something like that. Like, everyone's got a different background. But I definitely will say that if there's some kind of common person or if there's a common thing that's just there, like I feel people do enjoy their time there, just latching on to conversation, and alcohol helps those people, bond.
While Nichome provides a vital space for connection, it's not without its limitations. The heavy focus on drinking culture can be exclusionary for some, and the gendered divisions of many spaces can be challenging for non-binary and gender non-conforming individuals like Gray. On top of this, even Don, the mayor himself, notes that despite Nichome being a great place to meet new people and find friends, it then becomes the only place people will want to go. Meeting up with queer friends is difficult, requiring rigorous planning and effort in order to make sure people go through with plans. Unlike pre-COVID Japan, where people frequently held house parties or social gatherings away from Nichome. Nevertheless, without Nichome, I know that I would have had a harder time making queer friends during my time in Japan, as there were only a few at my host university. And I dread to think how much harder it would be in working society if we as queer people didn't have a safe space to call our own. For Sadie, while she did express how difficult it was to find a relationship in Nichome, she was still able to find other queer friends much easier. While Nichome may feel like a designated zone for queerness, it also offers a rare space of visibility and connection, something my interviewees found both comforting and complex in a society where public expressions of queer identity remain limited. As we wrap up, it's important to consider how these experiences abroad shape queer identities long term, especially when expats consider returning home. James shared some poignant reflections on this.
I'm here is why I'm kind of like hesitant to go back in a way, because I feel like I'm a bit scared to, if I go back, how will I feel? Because I definitely, when I go back for like vacation, obviously like it's fun, but I definitely, I feel like I can't pinpoint exactly what I feel has changed. But I definitely feel like I've changed as a person, and maybe it's just because now this part of me living in Japan and experienced Japanese culture, etc., has not, or just maybe, who knows what it is. It's also become like a part of me. Like this experience has become a part of me that maybe other people can't necessarily. I don't want to know what it is. Maybe it's like they can't relate to it. But I don't know if it's like they can't relate to it. That's made me feel like different. But maybe it's just like when I go back, I feel a loss of like, I don't know, I feel like loss is maybe not the word. I don't know what I feel a loss of, but like, I feel like I can only go forward from here. Like, I feel like if I go back to the States, if I go back to Seattle, I feel like I'll be going backwards. But I've already like gone through a door and I can't really like close the door and like go backwards. So I feel like if I stayed in the States, I would have been, or if I stayed in Seattle specifically, I feel like I would have been like, chill being there. But now I've opened this door to these possibilities and I've experienced this whole world of different perspectives and different people and interacted with like, so many different people who have like different cultural backgrounds, etc., or different reasons of being in Japan, or I don't even know. I don't know. I feel like I can't go backwards. And if I were to go backwards, I feel like it'd be like ignoring like something that happened. It definitely would be lost. And I don't, oh my God, I cannot explain how I feel. But it's definitely like, now what you chose this, and maybe who knows how that will affect your future. Will you be in the future? But that's not to say that I can't go back to the States, but I would say I'll have to be able to overcome some sort of loss and then figure out how I want to. So obviously maybe the loss itself would be Japan, because like obviously I've spent 3 years here and I've learned like the culture, the language. I've made a lot of connections and friends. And if I were to go back, I would have to throw away a bit of that. Like obviously you can still engage in Japanese back in the States and stuff like that, but like there's definitely like community or like things that you would miss and that you would leave behind. And so maybe that's part of it.
James's words highlight the transformative nature of living abroad as a queer person. The experiences, connections, and personal growth become an integral part of one's identity, making the prospect of returning home both exciting and daunting. When talking about traveling abroad, people tend to only focus on culture shock, the phenomenon of feeling lost or worried about leaving your home and having to start anew in a foreign culture and how isolating it can be. People often neglect to think about reverse culture shock. Once the place you've moved to starts feeling like home, the idea of leaving it to your home country becomes a daunting prospect, as it has for James, and as it was for me. Expats won't always realise how they've changed, but once returning home, others around you will be able to notice. For Don, his mother noted how he had changed for the better, wanting to put him instead of his siblings as her emergency contact, if only he didn't live in Japan. While James hasn't lived in Japan for as long as Don, both of them recognise the changes that have taken place. James's reflections highlight the psychological and emotional challenges faced by those who have lived abroad for an extended period, emphasising the profound impact of cross-cultural experiences on personal identity and worldview. As we've heard today, navigating queer identity in Japan as a foreigner is a complex journey of self-discovery, cultural navigation, and personal growth. While challenges exist, many find the experience ultimately enriching and transformative. For any listeners looking to study in Japan or move there for work, I couldn't recommend it more. While yes, it can be daunting and there may be some issues that arise, the overall experience is overwhelmingly enjoyable. Nadine Dolby proposes that study abroad, and by extension working abroad, provides not only the possibility of encountering the world, but of encountering oneself. And while she may have referred more so to one's national identity, I think that it can also help to understand one's sexual identity and place in the world. For my interviewees, their experiences in Japan have shaped who they are now. By moving to a new country, people are able to explore opportunities they may not have had access to, or be able to pursue new pathways that they may have been too afraid to follow when under the expectations of their families and friends who knew a certain side to them. While queerness in Japan may not present itself in the same way as in the UK or US, it is still alive and beating, and myself and my interviewees have all been able to experience it in all its forms. Both the internal struggle of navigating coming out, but also the euphoria of finding other like-minded people in Shinjuku Nichome, and being able to let go and enjoy ourselves. As Dame Linda Colley puts it, identities are not like hats. Human beings can, and do, put on several at a time, and this continues to be true for queer people in Japan, having to find their way in Japanese society and its nuanced expressions of queerness. Thank you for joining us for this exploration of queer identities abroad. I'm Max, and I'll see you next time.